She rolled through the restaurant door and watched every head turn. Some looked away fast. Some stared too long. Vivian Cross had learned to read a room in 3 seconds flat. Who would pity her? Who would pretend not to notice? And who would already be calculating their exit? She'd been on exactly 6 blind dates since the accident. All 6 ended the same way. A smile that didn't reach the eyes, an excuse about an early morning, a goodbye that meant never again. Tonight, she told herself, would be different. She almost believed it.
If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Logan Mercer was already running 4 minutes late, which, for a man who hadn't been on a date in 3 years, felt like a personal catastrophe. He stood on the sidewalk outside Ember and Oak, a restaurant his sister Dana had described as cozy but impressive, casual but not sad, and he smoothed the front of his shirt for the 3rd time since parking. The shirt was new. He'd bought it 2 days ago specifically for tonight, then spent 20 minutes this afternoon wondering if buying a new shirt for a blind date was trying too hard, then another 10 minutes deciding that trying too hard was better than showing up in the flannel he wore to parent-teacher conferences. His phone buzzed. Dana. You're standing outside, aren't you? Just go in. She's not going to bite you. Logan. How do you know I'm outside, Dana? Because I know you. Go. In. He pocketed the phone and pushed through the door. The restaurant was warm inside. Amber lighting, the low hum of a jazz standard playing somewhere in the back, the smell of something with garlic and butter that made his stomach remind him he'd been too nervous to eat lunch. A hostess smiled at him from behind a small wooden podium. Reservation? She asked. Mercer, Logan Mercer, table for 2. Of course. She grabbed 2 menus. Right this way. He followed her through the main dining room, past tables of couples leaning toward each other and small groups mid-laugh, and he felt the particular loneliness of a man who'd spent so long on the outside of moments like these that he'd almost forgotten he was allowed to want one. The table was tucked near a window. A single candle. A small vase with a white flower he couldn't name. His date wasn't there yet. He sat down, ordered a water, and checked his phone again. No messages from Dana. No messages from his daughter's babysitter, which meant Lily was fine, which meant he had no legitimate reason to leave. He told himself to relax. He was not relaxed. He heard the door before he saw her. Not a dramatic entrance, just the particular sound of a wheelchair's wheels on the wooden floor, a sound he registered before he consciously understood what it was. He looked up. Vivian Cross moved through the restaurant with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from years of navigating spaces designed for people who didn't have to think about navigation. She wore a deep burgundy dress, her dark hair pulled back in a way that wasn't fussy, but looked deliberate, and she was speaking quietly to the hostess walking beside her, probably asking about the table layout. Logan watched her scan the room. He watched her find him. And he watched her face do something he wouldn't fully understand until much later. A fractional tightening around the eyes. A millisecond of bracing, like a person who has stepped off a high dive enough times to know exactly what the impact feels like, and has simply decided to keep jumping anyway. He stood up. Not because he'd planned to, not because he'd thought about what the polite thing to do was. He just stood up, the way he'd been raised to do when someone walked toward him. She reached the table. The hostess hovered. Logan? Vivian said. That's me. He extended his hand. Vivian? Yes. She shook it. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were dark brown, and they were already watching him with a quiet, assessing intelligence that made him feel like she was reading something written on his face. I should have mentioned my situation beforehand. I realize that. I apologize for not being clear when we were texting. The hostess was still hovering. Logan looked at the table. The setup was wrong. The second chair was positioned in a way that would have forced Vivian to sit at the side rather than across from him, wedged against the edge, which wasn't great. He looked at the window seat, the better position in the room, the one with the actual view of the street outside. He picked up the extra chair, moved it out of the way, and repositioned himself so the window side space was open and clear. That spot has better light, he said, and you can see the street from there. The fountain's lit up tonight. Vivian looked at the space. Then she looked at him. Thank you, she said after a moment. It came out a little quieter than she'd probably intended. I'll let you two get settled, the hostess said, placing the menus down and disappearing with the efficiency of someone who knew when she wasn't needed. Logan sat back down. Vivian settled into position across from him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the candle between them flickered once. "I want to say something," Vivian said. "Okay." "You don't have to stay." Her voice was even, professional almost, like she was delivering information she'd delivered before. "I know this isn't what you were expecting. Dana told me she'd shared a photo, but I don't think she mentioned her. Anyway, it's fine. You can say you have somewhere to be, or that it's not a good fit, or nothing at all. I won't hold it against you." Logan looked at her across the table. She was holding herself very still, the kind of still that took practice. "Dana said you run a company," he said. A short pause. "Yes." "What kind?" Another pause, longer this time. She was recalibrating, he could see it. "Technology and infrastructure consulting, with a social impact division that focuses on accessibility in public and commercial spaces." That sounds like a lot of moving parts. It is. The edge of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "What did Dana tell you about me exactly?" "That you were smart, that you had strong opinions about things, and that you'd probably argue with me at least once during dinner." "She said that?" "She said it like it was a selling point." Vivian laughed. It was short and a little surprised, like it came out before she could stop it, and something in her posture shifted by about 3 degrees, still careful, but less like she was waiting for impact. "Dana talks too much," she said. "She genuinely believes she's helping. That's the frustrating part." "Agreed." She picked up her menu. "Are you going to keep standing by for my exit cue, or are we going to order?" "I was thinking we'd order." "Good choice." They started with this calamari because Vivian said she'd heard it was good here, and Logan said he'd never actually ordered calamari at a restaurant because he'd been quietly convinced since college that he wouldn't like it, and she told him that was exactly the kind of low-stakes irrational avoidance behavior that said more about a person than they realized. "What does it say about me?" he asked. "That you've made a decision based on a feeling rather than evidence, and then protected that decision by never testing it." That's a lot to get from calamari. "I run a company," she said. "Reading people quickly is part of the job description." "And what else are you reading right now?" She considered him across the table. The candlelight did something interesting to her face, softened the professional precision, brought out something more tired and more human beneath it. "You're more comfortable than I expected," she said. "You're not doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where someone tries so hard not to look at my wheelchair that they end up looking at it constantly and then overcorrect by being aggressively cheerful about accessibility and then ask me within the first 15 minutes how I manage." She made a small, dry gesture. "You know, everything." "Do people actually say, 'How do you manage everything?'" "Second date in, a man told me he thought I was incredibly brave for going to the grocery store." Logan put his water down. "For going to the grocery store." "For going to the grocery store." "What did you say?" "I told him I was also very brave for making left turns and paying my electric bill on time." She tilted her head. He didn't ask for a third date. Shocking. The calamari arrived. Logan tried a piece without ceremony, and it was, as it turned out, perfectly fine, crispy and not rubbery at all. And he said so, and Vivian said told you so, and they moved on to actual conversation the way people sometimes do when the small talk accidentally becomes real. She talked about her company the way Logan suspected she talked about most things she cared about, with a specificity that cut through vagueness and an occasional frustration when words weren't quite capturing what she meant. She'd started cross-infrastructure consulting 8 years ago, when she was 22 and fresh out of an MBA program and, in her words, absurdly overconfident in a way that probably saved me, because if I'd known what I was getting into, I might not have started. The accessibility division came later, about 4 years ago, after the accident. She didn't offer details about the accident, and Logan didn't ask for them. He noticed, filed it away, and kept listening. "The problem with accessibility consulting," she said, cutting a piece of salmon with a clean, practiced motion, "isn't that companies don't want to comply. Most of them do. The problem is that compliance and actual usability are completely different things. You can meet every code requirement and still build a space that makes someone feel like an afterthought. What does that look like? A ramp at the back entrance next to the dumpsters. A wheelchair-accessible bathroom that requires you to back up 17 feet to close the door from the inside because nobody actually measured the turning radius. A restaurant that has one accessible table and it's directly next to the kitchen because that's where there happened to be floor space. She paused. I've eaten next to a lot of industrial dishwashers. That's a specific kind of bad. It's a specific kind of being reminded that you were accommodated rather than considered. She looked at him. There's a difference. Yeah, Logan said. There is. She watched him for a moment like she was checking whether he actually understood or was just agreeing. Apparently she decided to extend some credit because she moved on. What about you? Dana said you teach. History. 11th grade, mostly. Some 12th. Do you like it? Most people asked if he liked it with a kind of skeptical pity, the way they asked if someone liked any underpaid and undervalued thing. Vivian asked it straight, like the answer could genuinely go either way. Yeah, he said. I do. It took me a while to figure out why, but I think it's because 17-year-olds are the last age group that still has the capacity to be actually angry about injustice. They haven't yet figured out how to be cynical about it. They just get mad. And that's useful? It's the whole thing, really. If you can point someone towards something that makes them angry in the right direction, they'll remember it. What's the right direction? Toward the question of what could have been done differently. He turned his water glass slowly. Not toward blame, toward agency, I guess. The idea that things could have gone another way if different choices were made, which means things now could also go another way. Vivian looked at him for a moment. That's a very particular thing to care about. Occupational habit. Or, she said, it's what you tell students because it's what you needed someone to tell you. The directness of it landed somewhere unexpected. Logan didn't answer immediately. Maybe, he said. Yeah, maybe both. She didn't push. He appreciated that more than he could easily say. Menpom. He told her about Lily at some point between the entrees and the thing the waiter brought that was technically a shared dessert, but which Vivian had ordered without asking him, because she'd looked at him and made a unilateral executive decision that he was a person who would want the chocolate lava cake, which was completely accurate. Lily was 7, in 2nd grade, obsessed this month with horses, and before that with deep-sea fish, and before that with a PBS documentary series about bridges that she'd watched in its entirety twice. She was missing her 2 front teeth and had her mother's laugh, which was the kind of thing that hit Logan at unexpected moments. Hearing Lily giggle at something on TV and suddenly not being able to breathe quite right for a second. What was her name? Vivian asked. Claire. He said it without bracing for it, which he'd learned to do over time. She died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She was 28. I'm sorry. It wasn't said with the particular careful gentleness that people sometimes weaponized, the kind that was more about making themselves comfortable with death than about actually acknowledging someone's loss. Vivian said it the way you'd say it if you simply meant it. Thank you, he said. What was she like? Nobody asked that. Not after the sympathy, not after the condolences. They asked how he was managing, whether Lily was adjusting well, whether he had family support. They didn't ask what Claire was like. He looked at Vivian across the chocolate lava cake. She was stubborn, he said, like genuinely, specifically stubborn in a way that initially drove me insane, and eventually I realized was one of the things I loved most about her. She had opinions about everything, not important things. She had opinions about the correct way to load a dishwasher that she would defend with the energy of someone defending a constitutional principle. Vivian smiled. Bottom rack, plates toward the center. She said bottom rack, plates outward, for maximum water exposure. She wasn't wrong. I know. I've never been able to load a dishwasher incorrectly since she died, and I hate it. It was the first time he talked about Claire and laughed in the same breath in. He wasn't sure how long. It felt strange. Not bad strange. Just strange. Lily sounds like her, Vivian said. In the best ways. He turned his fork over. And in the ways that are harder. She's got this thing where she'll get very quiet when she's sad. Doesn't cry, doesn't talk about it, just goes quiet. 7 years old and she's already figured out how to keep things to herself. That worries you. Yeah. Because you do the same thing. He looked up. Vivian held his gaze, not unkind, just accurate. Dana talks too much, he said again. She told me almost nothing, actually. You've been doing it yourself all evening. He didn't have a response to that, so he ate a bite of lava cake and decided to let it stand as evidence for her case.
The restaurant got quieter as the evening moved on, tables emptying, the lighting seeming to dim by another degree, the jazz standard replaced by something slower. At some point, Logan realized they were one of 3 remaining tables, and the waiter had refilled his water twice without them noticing.
He didn't want to leave. That surprised him. He'd wanted to leave earlier, standing on the sidewalk. He'd wanted an exit route and a plausible excuse and a way to get back to his quiet apartment, and Lily sleeping down the hall in the particular safety of a life that was small but known. He didn't want that now. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been asking me things all evening. Something more direct." She set down her water. "Go ahead." "You said on the way in that I didn't have to stay, that you wouldn't hold it against me. Do you say that every time?" She didn't answer immediately. Her hands rested in her lap, and she looked at the candle between them rather than at him. "Yes," she said. "Has it ever worked? Has someone ever stayed because you gave them the option to leave?" "I think so." A pause. "It's hard to know. People are very good at pretending for an evening. I'm not pretending." "I know." She looked up at him. "That's also unusual." "Not that unusual." "Logan." Her voice was quiet, not hard, but level. "I've been on 6 dates since my accident. Not 6 this year, 6 total in 4 years. Do you know why?" He shook his head. "Because I got tired of being someone's lesson in empathy. The man who dates the woman in the wheelchair because it makes him feel like a good person. The one who tells the story at parties." She shifted slightly. "Not maliciously, not even consciously, just, I was tired of being the part of someone else's story where they learned something. That's not what this is. I'm telling you what I was afraid of walking in tonight. And now?" She looked at him for a long moment. The candle between them had burned down by at least an inch. "Now I'm less afraid than I was," she said carefully. "That's as far as I'll go." "That's fair." "It's more than fair. It's honestly further than I expected to get by the end of a first dinner." He smiled. She didn't quite smile back, but something around her eyes changed, warmer and more present than the careful professional assessment she'd been running on him all evening. "Can we do this again?" he asked. "You mean a second date?" "I mean dinner, or coffee, or whatever works better with your schedule, because I'm guessing your schedule is insane." "My schedule is completely insane," she said. "I have a board meeting next Thursday that I've been dreading since January." "Friday night, then. After the board meeting. You can come and tell me how it went, and I'll listen and tell you which board member sounds the most insufferable." She looked at him. "That's a remarkably specific offer," she said. "I'm a remarkably specific person." She didn't say yes immediately, which he was coming to understand was just how she operated. She thought before she answered, and she didn't perform enthusiasm she didn't feel. He respected that. He found it honestly more than a little attractive. "Friday," she said finally. "But I picked the restaurant because I know which ones are actually accessible and which ones just claim to be, and I'm not eating next to another industrial dishwasher." "Completely reasonable. And you're paying." "Also reasonable. Don't be late." "I was 4 minutes late tonight." "I know," she said. "I was watching the door." The waiter brought the check. Logan reached for it before she could do anything, and Vivian let him, which he sensed was a deliberate choice rather than passive acceptance. Outside, the October air had gotten colder. The fountain she could see from her window seat was still lit, exactly as he'd said it would be. White lights on the water, people walking past with their hands in their pockets. He walked her to where her car was parked. A modified vehicle, she'd mentioned it briefly without fanfare, and she unlocked it with the remote. "I have to say something," she said, not quite looking at him. "Okay." "When I walked in tonight, you moved that chair." She paused. "You didn't make a thing of it. You just did it and moved on." "It was in the way." "I know, but—" She stopped. Something passed across her face, brief and complicated and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the time. You'd be surprised how rare that is. How often it becomes a production, a conversation, an opportunity for someone to demonstrate how considerate they are. Logan didn't say anything. So, she said, thank you for that. You're thanking me for moving a chair. I'm thanking you for not needing a trophy for it. She clicked the car door. Friday, don't be late. I'll be early, he said. She looked at him over her shoulder. We'll see. And then she got herself into her car with a smooth, practiced sequence of movements that she'd clearly done 1,000 times. And he stood on the sidewalk in the October cold, and he watched her pull away. And he thought about a woman who walked into rooms already braced for disappointment and still showed up anyway. And he thought that was one of the braver things he'd seen in a long time. His phone buzzed. Dana. Well? He looked at the message. Logan. She's going to argue with me at least once before the end of the second date. Dana. That's a yes. Logan. Good night, Dana. He pocketed his phone. The fountain was still lit. He stood there for another minute, for no particular reason, watching the water, before turning up the collar of his jacket and walking back to his car. He had a babysitter to relieve and a daughter who would want a full accounting of his evening in the morning, delivered in exhaustive detail, including what he ate and whether he laughed. For the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, he had good answers to all of those questions. He was early on Friday. Not 4 minutes late, not right on time. He was standing outside Ardea, the restaurant Vivienne had chosen, a full 11 minutes before their reservation, which he realized only after checking his phone and then feeling vaguely embarrassed about it in a way that had no audience and therefore made no sense. The restaurant was on a quieter block downtown, a converted storehouse with wide doorways and a ramp built into the main entrance that didn't look like an afterthought. It looked like it had been there from the beginning, part of the design rather than bolted on later. He noticed that and then noticed himself noticing it, and understood that one dinner with Vivienne Cross had already changed what he paid attention to. She arrived at 7 on the dot. He spotted her half a block away, moving at a pace that suggested she wasn't particularly interested in being late either, her coat dark against the evening, and she was on her phone with someone, her expression sharp and businesslike, whatever she was hearing not making her happy. She ended the call as she reached him, dropped the phone into her bag, and looked up. "You're early," she said. "You said don't be late." "I said we'd see." She studied him for a second, the same quiet assessment he remembered from last week, like she was running a quick diagnostic. "The board meeting was a disaster, by the way." "What happened?" "Later," she said. "Feed me first." Inside, the table was round, which worked better, and the waiter didn't do the thing where he looked at Logan to hand over Vivienne's menu. She ordered a glass of wine and didn't consult Logan about it, which he found oddly refreshing, like she had no interest in performing a kind of softness she didn't feel. "Okay," he said once the water came. "Board meeting." She exhaled slowly, turning her wine glass by the stem. "You know what? It wasn't even the meeting itself. The meeting was fine. It was after. One of the board members, Hargrove, he's been on the board since my father's time, which means he has opinions about everything, pulled me aside in the hallway and told me, very kindly, very paternally, that he thought my accessibility division was, quote, admirable, but that the company's core business needed to remain the priority." "What did you say?" "I told him the accessibility division generated 12% of our revenue last quarter." "What did he say?" "He said that was encouraging and he'd keep an eye on it." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Keep an eye on it. Like I brought him a science fair project." "He doesn't take you seriously." "Hargrove has never taken me seriously. The wheelchair gave him a new vocabulary for it, but he was doing the same thing when I was walking." She said it matter-of-factly, without particular bitterness, which somehow made it worse. "Some men just decide early on that you're decorative." After the accident, he added brave to the list, which is somehow more insulting than decorative. Logan thought about that. "Because decorative at least means he sees you." She pointed at him with the stem of her wine glass. "Exactly. Brave means he sees the wheelchair and then tells himself a story about overcoming things. And suddenly, I'm a category rather than a person with a fiduciary responsibility he needs to stop ignoring." "Do you have anyone on the board who actually backs you?" "Two. Miriam Chen, who is sharper than anyone in that room, including me, and Theo Park, who mostly backs me because he and Hargrove went to the same business school and have hated each other for 30 years. She paused. "I'll take the vote either way." "Is it going to become an issue? The division?" "It's already an issue. I'm just deciding how big I want to let it get before I force a resolution." She set her glass down.
Okay, your turn. Tell me something that happened this week that wasn't your sister asking you how the date went. She asked 3 times. I know, she texted me twice. Of course she did. He rubbed the back of his neck. Lily found out I went on a date. Vivian's eyebrows rose slightly. How'd she take it? Better than I expected, and also exactly as complicated as I feared, which is kind of Lily's signature move. He thought about how to explain it. She was in the kitchen when I got home Friday night. The babysitter had put her to bed, but she'd gotten back up, which she does when she's anxious about something, and she was sitting at the table with a glass of water like she was waiting for me to come home at 2 in the morning instead of 9:30. What did she say? She said, "Were you on a date?" And I said, "Yes," and there was this long pause, and then she said, "Was she nice?" And I said, "Yes." And then she said, "Okay," and took her water back to bed. That's it? That was it. Until Saturday morning, when she came and sat next to me while I was making eggs and said, "Do you think she'd like horses?" Vivian went quiet for a moment. She asked if I liked horses? She didn't know it was you, she just... Logan stopped, because the expression on Vivian's face was doing something careful and restrained, and he didn't want to push past whatever that was. She's protective. She processes things sideways, doesn't come at anything directly. Like her father. You said that last week. It's still true this week. He looked at her across the table. She was watching him with an attention he was starting to recognize, not the professional diagnostics of the first hour at Ember and Oak, but something quieter and more personal, the way you looked at someone when you were trying to decide how much of yourself to extend in their direction. What did you tell her? Vivian asked. About whether the woman liked horses? I said I wasn't sure yet, but that she was smart and she had strong opinions, and that she probably had an answer. Vivian considered this. Arabians are the most overrated horse in the history of equestrian culture. Logan laughed, actually laughed, the kind that came without warning. I'll pass that along. You absolutely should not pass that along to a 7-year-old who is clearly a horse person. She'll never forgive you. What's the correct horse? Quarter horse, no ego, all competence. Does exactly what it's supposed to do and doesn't need everyone to know about it. She picked up her menu, glancing over it. That's also the correct kind of person, for what it's worth. The second date moved differently than the first. Not more comfortable exactly. Vivian wasn't a comfortable person in the way that some people were comfortable, all rounded edges and easy warmth. She was precise and a little guarded, and she chose her words like someone who'd learned the cost of imprecision. But there was less of the bracing in her, less of the waiting for the exit he'd noticed last week, and that absence made the whole evening feel like a different kind of conversation. She told him about how she'd built the company, not the polished origin story she probably told investors. The messier version, the one that included the first year of operating out of a sublet office the size of a storage unit, a contract that fell through 2 weeks before payroll, and a co-founder who'd left after 14 months taking 2 of their biggest client contacts with him. Did you sue him? Logan asked. I thought about it. My lawyer told me I had a case. She paused. But it would have taken 18 months and every bit of energy I had. And I decided I'd rather spend those 18 months building something that made the whole thing irrelevant. Did it work? 3 years later, we signed a contract twice the size of anything Marcus ever brought in. She said the name like it was a small stone she was flicking off a table. So yes. You don't sound satisfied about it. I'm satisfied. I'm just not... She moved her hand slightly. I don't need him to know about it. That's what surprised me. I thought I'd want him to know. But when it happened, I realized I didn't care at all. I'd stopped caring about Marcus somewhere around month 4 of year 2. And I'd been carrying this idea of future satisfaction around like currency I was saving to spend. And then when I had the thing to spend it on, I found out the account was already closed. Logan turned that over. When did the accident happen? She didn't answer immediately. The shift in topic landed between them without apology. He'd intended it that way, because she'd been circling around that 4-year mark all evening, and he thought she might want someone to simply ask. 3.5 years ago, she said. Car accident. Other driver ran a red light. A pause. I had 3 surgeries. The last one was supposed to have a 40% chance of restoring partial function. It didn't. I'm sorry. I know.
She said it without deflecting, without performing stoicism or performing grief, just acknowledged it and let it sit. The first year was, I'm not going to say it was the hardest year of my life, because that would be giving it more shape than it had. It was mostly just very gray. Everything was gray. And then at some point, it started being less gray. And then there were actual colors sometimes, and I was running my company again, and I was in physical therapy 3 times a week, and I had learned 112 new skills I never expected to need. And somewhere in there, I stopped waiting to feel like myself again, and just became this. She gestured at herself, a small motion. This is it. This is me now. Does that feel like a loss? She looked at him sharply. Not offended, more like the question was unexpected. Yes, she said, and also no. Both, at the same time. That's the honest answer. A beat. Most people don't ask that. They either assume I must be devastated or they want me to tell them I'm grateful for what it taught me, because that's more comfortable for them. What did it teach you? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a couple walked past the window, laughing at something. That I was spending an enormous amount of energy on things that didn't matter, she said finally. That I had confused being impressive with being happy, and that the people who showed up in the gray year, not to fix it, not to tell me it was going to be fine, but just to sit in the gray with me, those were the only people I actually wanted in my life. Who showed up? My assistant, Carla. She came to the hospital every day for 6 weeks. Never asked what I needed, just brought things. Coffee, a specific moisturizer I'd mentioned once, articles she thought I'd find interesting. She never once said I was brave. The edge of her mouth moved. My mother came for the first 2 weeks and then told me I needed to find a more positive attitude, which was accurate and also not what I needed to hear. Did you tell her that? I told her I loved her and I needed her to go home. She's been hurt about it for 3 years. A breath. Families are complicated. They really are. She looked at him. Your family. Beyond Dana? My parents are in Phoenix. They tried to move in after Claire died, and I let them stay for 3 weeks, and then I needed them to leave too. He traced the rim of his water glass. My dad meant well, but he grieved by staying busy, which meant there was always something being fixed or organized in the apartment, and I needed to be able to fall apart in a space that wasn't under constant renovation. Did you? Fall apart? More than once. He said it without flinching. I'm a reasonably functional person, and I fell apart a lot, and then I got back up because Lily needed me to. A pause. Not immediately. There was a period where I wasn't sure I was doing it right. Any of it. Getting her to school, keeping my job, making dinner. I was doing all of it and feeling like I was doing all of it wrong, and there was nobody to tell me which parts were actually wrong and which parts were just me panicking. What helped? Lily, eventually. She started leaving drawings on my pillow. She'd never say anything about them. I'd find them at night, horses mostly, or these elaborate multi-level houses she designed, or one memorable evening, a very detailed drawing of a shark eating a submarine, which apparently was from something she'd seen on TV and wanted to share. He stopped. She was trying to take care of me. 7 years old, and she figured out that I needed something, and she found the only language she had. Vivian was quiet for a beat longer than usual. She sounds remarkable, she said. She's also a pain in the neck when she's overtired, and she will argue with me about bedtime with the energy of a trial lawyer. He picked up his fork. She's a whole person. I keep being surprised by that. She's been a whole person since she was about 4. Kids do that, Vivian said. Fully formed from the start, and then everyone spends years trying to sand down the edges that make them themselves. Were your edges sanded down? Brutally. She said it lightly. My mother wanted a daughter who was graceful and pleasant and didn't correct people in meetings. She got me. What did your father want? Something shifted in her face, briefer and more private. Someone to run the company eventually. Which I did, just not the way he imagined. She straightened slightly. He died 6 years ago. He would have had complicated feelings about what I've built. Complicated because of the accessibility work? Complicated because I went sideways from his vision and made it work, which he would have found both gratifying and deeply irritating. The look on her face was fond, in the way that grief sometimes looked like fondness after enough time. He would have called me stubborn. You are stubborn. I know. She didn't argue it. In the family, I think of it as a feature. They closed the restaurant again. Not the last table this time. There was one other couple in the far corner, deep in a conversation they couldn't hear. But close. Logan paid the check before she could reach for her bag, and she let him again, and this time she didn't acknowledge it at all, which told him she'd decided it was just the arrangement and had filed it away accordingly. Outside, the night had gotten colder. She buttoned her coat, and he turned his collar up, and they sat and stood, respectively, in the pool of light outside Ardia's front entrance, and neither of them immediately moved toward their cars. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay." "Are you doing this because you feel something, or because you're a fundamentally kind person who feels sorry for me and doesn't know how to say so?" The question was blunt and clean as a scalpel. He understood why she had to ask it. He also understood that flinching from it would be the wrong answer. Both of those things could be true at the same time, he said. "I know. That's why I'm asking." He looked at her. The orange light from the restaurant's exterior made everything warmer. "I feel something," he said. "I'm also a person who feels things in general. I don't think I can turn that off, and I don't want to. But what I feel right now, sitting here, is that I've had 2 dinners with you, and I've thought about the conversations both times for longer than I've thought about anything personal in years. That's not pity. Pity doesn't feel like this." She held his gaze. "What does it feel like?" "Like I'm interested," he said. "Like I want to keep listening. Like I'm annoyed that there's no 3rd dinner tonight." Vivian looked at him for a long moment. She didn't smile, not quite, but he was starting to map the geography of her expressions. There was a particular stillness she had when something landed that she hadn't expected to land, and she was doing it now. "Thursday," she said. "Not dinner. There's a panel discussion on urban accessibility at the Meridian Center. I'm on the panel." "You want me to come watch you argue with people?" "I want you to come see what I actually do." A beat. "And yes, there will probably be arguing. There's always arguing, but I want you to see it before this goes any further because it matters to me and I need to know what you think of it when it's not just a dinner conversation." "Then I'll be there," he said. "Don't be late." "I was early tonight." "I noticed," she said, and this time the thing that wasn't quite a smile made it all the way. He walked her to her car, and she didn't need help and didn't ask for it, and he didn't offer, just stayed nearby in case she wanted company for the 15 seconds it took, which she seemed to. She got in, rolled down the window. "Logan?" "Yeah?" "The answer to Lily's question," she said. "For the record, quarter horse or nothing." He laughed. She drove away. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a minute, hands in his pockets, thinking that he hadn't felt this specific feeling, that slightly too alive thing in the chest, equal parts anticipation and vertigo, in years. He'd forgotten what it felt like to want to see someone again with this kind of urgency. He wasn't sure if that was exciting or terrifying. He decided it was probably both, which, in his experience, was how most things that mattered tended to arrive. The Meridian Center was a glass and steel building that had been renovated 2 years ago with the kind of accessibility features that actually worked. Automatic doors with wide clearance, elevators with voice prompts that weren't broken, bathrooms with turning radii that had been measured by someone who understood what a turning radius was. Logan noticed all of this walking in, which continued to surprise him, the way his attention had been quietly recalibrated over the course of 2 dinners, and a week of thinking about those dinners more than was probably reasonable for a man with a full-time job and a 7-year-old. He found a seat near the aisle in the 3rd row, not too close, and checked his phone. 7 minutes until the panel started. He texted Dana to confirm Lily's pickup from school was handled, got back a thumbs up, and 3 question marks that he ignored and put his phone away. The panel filed in from a side door. There were 4 of them. A city planner he didn't recognize, an architect whose name was on a placard Logan couldn't read from his seat, a disability rights attorney named Marcus Webb, and Vivian. She came in last. Dark blazer, no tie, the kind of put-together that looked effortless, and Logan now understood was not effortless at all. It was a choice she made deliberately, because she'd told him once over dinner that the moment she stopped looking completely in control was the moment people started asking if she was okay in that particular tone she couldn't stand. She sat at the panel table, arranged her materials, and scanned the audience in one efficient sweep. She found him in about 4 seconds. Her expression didn't change, but she gave him the smallest possible nod, the kind that could have been a greeting or could have been a coincidental head movement, and then she looked back at her notes. Logan settled into his seat and decided he was in for something interesting. He was right. The moderator, a woman from a local urban planning nonprofit, opened with a question about where the city stood on its 5-year accessibility roadmap, and the city planner gave a practiced answer full of percentage benchmarks and initiative names that sounded significant and said very little. The architect added something about design philosophy. Marcus Webb said the roadmap was aspirational at best and legally insufficient at worst, which got a murmur from the audience. Then the moderator turned to Vivian. Ms. Cross, your company has consulted on 14 municipal projects in this region in the past 3 years. From a practical standpoint, what's your assessment of how implementation is actually going? Vivian looked at the city planner with the particular pleasantness of someone who was about to say something the city planner was not going to enjoy. The roadmap is well written, she said. The problem is the gap between what gets approved in planning sessions and what gets built. I walked through the Hendricks Avenue corridor last month. She paused on walked, didn't correct it, moved on, and 3 of the 5 curb cuts that were supposed to have been completed in the last fiscal year are still not done. One of them has a construction barrier that's been in place for 6 months. The detour route, it adds 4 blocks for a wheelchair user. The city planner shifted in his seat. There have been contractor delays. There are always contractor delays, Vivian said, not unkindly. What there isn't is a mechanism for accountability when delays run longer than 90 days on accessibility infrastructure specifically. There's a budget line item, but no enforcement timeline, which means it perpetually falls to the bottom of the priority list. I think that's a fair point, the architect said carefully. But I'd also push back slightly on framing this as negligence. There are resource constraints are real, Vivian said, and they're also how we talk about things we've decided not to prioritize. The city allocated funds for Hendricks Avenue 18 months ago. The issue isn't resources. The issue is that an inaccessible curb cut is an inconvenience someone notes on a report, where an equivalent gap in vehicular infrastructure would be a safety crisis. The audience had gotten very quiet in the particular way audiences got quiet when someone was saying the actual thing. Marcus Webb leaned toward his microphone. What Ms. Cross is describing is a systemic pattern, not isolated delays. The legal standard requires more than good intentions on a timeline. The moderator steered them toward a question about private development partnerships, and the dynamic shifted slightly, but Logan kept watching Vivienne, the way she listened when others spoke, genuinely attentive rather than waiting for her turn, the way she chose which fights to pick and which to let land without her weight behind them, the way she held the line when the city planner tried twice more to reframe the Hendricks Avenue question as a resource issue, and she returned both times, calmly and without escalation, to the accountability gap. She was good at this, not good in the performed way of someone who'd been trained to present well, but good in the way of someone who had thought hard about a thing for a long time and knew exactly what she meant. He found that more attractive than he'd expected to, and he'd already expected to find it attractive. Afterward, there was a reception in the adjacent hall, wine and small plates and the specific energy of a professional gathering where everyone was networking while pretending they were just having a conversation. Logan stood near the far wall with a glass of water and waited. Vivian found him 20 minutes later. After 3 separate conversations, he watched her navigate. A woman from a nonprofit who wanted to discuss a potential partnership, the architect who had the look of someone making a diplomatic apology, and Marcus Webb, who made her laugh twice in about 90 seconds, which Logan noticed and filed without comment. "You waited," she said, pulling up beside him. "I said I'd be here." "People say a lot of things." She took a water from a passing tray. "What did you think?" "I think the city planner left early. He always leaves early when I'm on a panel." She said it without satisfaction. "What did you actually think?" "I think you were the only person up there who had specific data and wasn't afraid to use it, and the architect knew it, and the city planner definitely knew it, and Marcus Webb knew it and enjoyed watching it happen." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that it?" "I think you were right about the framing thing. The way inconveniences become crises depending on who they happen to." He looked at her. "I use that in class sometimes. The way historical problems get categorized as tragedies or as footnotes depending on whose problem they were. Same mechanism." Vivian turned her water glass in her hands. "Does it work? In class?" "They get mad, which I told you is the goal. Anger without direction just exhausts people. That's why the next part is always what could have been done differently." He paused. which is also what you were doing. You weren't just pointing at the gap, you were pointing at the mechanism that creates it. Enforcement timeline, accountability structure, specific and fixable. She looked at him with the particular stillness he'd learned to recognize, the one that meant something had landed. Most people who come to these panels, she said carefully, walk away remembering that there's an accessibility problem somewhere. Which is fine, but they don't walk away understanding why it keeps happening after everyone has agreed it shouldn't. You're trying to change the second part. I've been trying to change the second part for 3 years. She exhaled. Some days it moves. Some days I spend 4 hours in a meeting where everyone nods and then nothing changes, and I go home and I am very tired. What do you do when you're very tired? I watch terrible television, she said, specifically cooking competition shows where people cry about bread. That's extremely specific. I've had a lot of tired evenings. The edge of her mouth moved. What do you do? Grade papers, which sounds more noble than it is, because grading papers is extremely tedious and it occupies exactly the right amount of mental space to stop me from thinking about whatever I'm trying not to think about. That's just productivity-flavored avoidance. Completely, he agreed. It's also why my students have the fastest paper return time in the department. She laughed. The real one, the short, surprised one he'd first heard at Ember and Oak and had been quietly hoping to hear again ever since. They left the Meridian Center together and ended up at a coffee place 2 blocks down because neither of them wanted the evening to stop, but a third dinner in a week felt like they should at least pretend the occasion was different. The coffee place was small and warm, with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and exactly one step at the entrance that had a portable ramp the owner brought out without being asked, navigating the 3-foot journey from front door to interior with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who'd done it 100 times. Vivian said thank you without ceremony. Logan noticed the owner had already moved on to taking the next order. That's what it should look like, Vivian said quietly, once they were settled at a corner table. Not a production, just handled. Does it bother you when it's a production? It bothers me when I have to manage someone's discomfort about managing it, she said. When my being there becomes about how accommodating they are, instead of just coffee. I came for coffee. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I had a business lunch last year at a restaurant that had called ahead to say they were fully accessible. When I arrived, the manager came out personally to greet me and walked me through every accommodation they'd made and told me 3 times that I was very welcome there. While you were just trying to eat lunch. While I was trying to have a meeting with a client who then spent the first 10 minutes of our meeting talking about how lovely it was that I was there, which meant I had to redirect twice before we got to the actual agenda. She shook her head slightly. The intention was good. The effect was that I spent my lunch hour being someone's example of inclusion. Logan thought about that, about the careful line between consideration and spectacle, about how often those two things got confused, and by whom. Can I ask you something without it coming out wrong? He said. You can try. He stopped, worked out how to say it. When I do things, practically, move something out of the way or pick a route or notice an entrance, is there a version of that which becomes the same thing, where I'm managing it in a way that makes it about me? She looked at him steadily. Yes. Then how do I... You ask, she said, or you pay attention to whether I've already handled it, in which case you just let me have handled it. She set her mug down. The thing you did the first night, with the chair. That was right because I hadn't done it. It needed doing, and you did it and moved on. If you'd done it after I'd already started repositioning myself, or if you'd made a point of it, that's when it tips. That makes sense. It also changes depending on the day, she said, which he hadn't expected her to add. Some days I want no help with anything, and any offer feels like someone telling me I can't manage. Some days I'm tired and my shoulder is hurting from transferring, and if someone holds a door open, I'm genuinely glad. I don't always know in advance which day it is. So how am I supposed to know? You're not, always. You pay attention and you adjust, and sometimes you'll get it wrong. She met his eyes. That's just being in any relationship with any person. The wheelchair is a more visible variable, but it's the same skill. Are we in a relationship? She held his gaze. I don't know yet, she said, but I'm trying to figure out if I want to be, which is further than I've been in a while. Logan nodded. That's honest. I don't really do the other kind. I know. He turned his coffee cup.
I'm also figuring it out. For what it's worth, I haven't done this since Claire. Not in any real way. I've been on 2 dates in 3 years, not counting you, and they were both disasters for different reasons. What reasons? First one, I spent the whole evening comparing her to Claire in my head, which is not something I was consciously doing, but apparently I was doing it anyway, because she asked me something about what I like to do on weekends, and I gave her an answer that was entirely in the past tense, and then couldn't figure out how to fix it. Second one? Second one was nice and kind and interested, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with her, and I drove home and felt nothing. And I felt guilty about feeling nothing, and then I felt guilty about feeling guilty because who was I hurting? And by the time I got home, I'd been in my own head so long I gave myself a headache. Vivian considered this. And now? Now I'm in a coffee place at 9:30 on a Thursday, and I've been here for an hour and a half, and it feels like 20 minutes. He looked at her. That's the opposite of nothing. She was quiet. Outside, a couple walked past the window, the woman saying something that made the man cover his face, laughing. Neither of them noticed the coffee shop. Lily knows about me now, Vivian said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. I told her I'd been seeing someone. She asked again about the horses. I told her quarter horse. What did she say? She said, good. Arabians are too showy. He watched Vivian's face. She's 7. I don't know where she gets these opinions. The right place, apparently. A pause. Does she know about a slight gesture? That you use a wheelchair? Yes. I told her simply the same way I'd tell her anything. He folded his hands on the table. She asked if it hurt. I said I didn't know. That was a question she'd have to ask you herself someday. She said okay and went back to her drawing. Vivian was quiet for a beat. What was she drawing? She asked. A horse, he said, in a field, with a person riding it. He paused. The person was in a wheelchair. Lily had drawn it so the wheelchair was attached to the saddle somehow. She'd worked out the engineering for about 15 minutes before she was satisfied with it. Something crossed Vivian's face, brief and unguarded, the kind of expression that arrived before a person could decide whether to let it. Her jaw moved slightly. She looked down at her mug. She's 7, Logan said quietly. She solved the whole problem in crayon. Vivian didn't answer for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were clear, but the guarded professional surface had shifted a few degrees, the way ice shifts when the temperature underneath changes. I want to meet her, she said. Not yet. I don't want to rush it, and I don't want to confuse her, and I want to be careful about what it means when someone becomes part of her life and then isn't. A pause. But I want to, eventually. Okay, Logan said. Okay, she said. It was a small word for a large thing. They both seemed to understand that, and neither of them made more of it than it was. The trouble when it came arrived the way most trouble did. Not dramatically, but in the accumulation of small things that were each individually manageable and collectively exhausting. It started 3 weeks into what had stopped being a question and started being a fact. They were together now, navigating what that looked like without a manual. And the navigation was mostly good, mostly the kind of figuring out that was interesting rather than draining, except for the ways it wasn't. The first friction point was a Saturday afternoon when Logan had planned a day out, a farmer's market, then a gallery that Vivian had mentioned wanting to see, then dinner at a place she'd approved in advance. It should have been simple. What it actually was turned out to be, a farmer's market with vendor stalls packed close enough together that the main aisle was barely passable, and the interesting stalls were in a side section with packed gravel that was technically navigable but required twice the effort and half the enjoyment. A gallery with a wheelchair-accessible entrance in the back through a loading area that smelled of turpentine and stored blank canvases, and a dinner reservation at a restaurant that had told Logan on the phone that yes, they were accessible, which turned out to mean there was a ramp and the bathroom was on the main floor. But their table, his reservation, which he'd requested specifically be accessible, was in a raised section with 2 steps. The maitre d' offered to set up a table near the kitchen. Logan said they'd find somewhere else. He managed this exchange calmly, and Vivian said nothing while it was happening, and they left and found a Thai place 2 streets over that worked fine, and he ordered pad see ew and she ordered something with tofu that she declared was the best version she'd had in this part of the city, and the dinner was actually good.
But in the car afterward, Vivian was quiet. I'm sorry about the gallery entrance, he said. It's not your fault. I should have called ahead and asked specific questions instead of assuming, Logan, her voice was even, but not warm. It's not your fault. Those are systemic failures, not yours. You didn't build the farmer's market or design the loading dock. I know, but I could have. Can I say something without you taking it as criticism of you specifically? He stopped. Yes. She turned slightly toward him. You've been managing today, all day. You've been 3 steps ahead of every obstacle, running logistics, anticipating problems. I watched you calculate the width of that aisle before we went in, and I understand why, and some of it was genuinely helpful, and some of it, she paused, choosing, some of it made me feel like a project. The word landed quietly. That's not what I know it's not what you intended. She wasn't angry, she was precise. You were trying to make the day easy for me. But there's a version of that where you make it about smoothing every difficulty before I encounter it, which means I spend the day watching you compensate for my existence rather than just having a day with you. Logan sat with that. It wasn't comfortable to sit with. It had the particular discomfort of something that was accurate. What do I do differently? He asked. Some of it you can't control. The loading dock is the loading dock. She looked out the windshield. But you could ask me what I want to do about an obstacle instead of deciding for me. At the restaurant, you made the call to leave before you looked at me. Because it was I know why, and maybe that was the right call, but it was your call. A pause. I've been navigating inaccessible spaces my entire adult life, before the accident and after. I don't always want to fight, and I don't always want to leave. Sometimes I want to assess the situation myself and make my own choice, even if my choice is the same one you would have made. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a traffic light turned green. You told me, he said slowly, on the second date. You said you needed a partner who respected your independence, not someone who ran point for you. Yes? And I heard that, and then I spent today running point for you. Yes. He exhaled. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I know, but I'm still sorry. He turned the car onto the main road. I think I was so focused on not letting you hit obstacles that I didn't think about what it felt like to watch me trying to prevent you from hitting obstacles. There's a version of you hovering, she said, that feels very similar to pity, not because it is pity, but because it treats me like something that has to be protected from the world. And you've been navigating the world longer than I've been here. Significantly, he nodded. I need to get better at that. You're not bad at it, she said, which coming from her was not a small thing. You're learning, but so am I. I'm learning how to tell you when something's off without it turning into a thing, and tonight is me trying to do that. I'd rather you told me. I know, that's why I'm telling you. She looked at him. Don't make it a bigger deal than it is. It was a frustrating day with some genuinely bad infrastructure and one misstep from you. It wasn't a referendum on whether this works. Logan let that settle. He thought about what she'd said, about the difference between someone standing beside you and someone standing in front of you. He thought about all the times he'd instinctively stepped in front. Thursday, he said. Let's try again. Thursday I have a conference call until 7. 7:30 then. You pick the place this time, she said, but call ahead and ask specific questions. I'll ask specific questions. And if they hesitate before saying yes, we find somewhere else. Good. She looked forward. After a moment, the Thai place was genuinely excellent. It really was. So the day wasn't a total loss. Not even close, he said. She didn't say anything else, but her hand moved from her lap to the center console, close enough to his that the sides of their fingers were almost touching, and she left it there and he left his where it was. And they drove the rest of the way in a quiet that was not empty, not strained, just the kind of quiet that two people made together when they'd said the difficult things and come out the other side still in the same car going the same direction. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be. But it was theirs. The Thursday after the Thai place, Logan called ahead and asked specific questions. Not the vague, "Are you accessible?" he'd asked before, but the actual questions. Doorway clearance, table height, whether the accessible entrance was the main entrance or something around the back involving a loading dock and the smell of turpentine. The woman on the phone at Cala, a Mediterranean place Dana had recommended without knowing the context of why he needed a recommendation, answered all of them without hesitation and without the particular pause he'd learned to listen for, the one that meant someone was calculating how to describe a ramp next to a dumpster as an amenity. He texted Vivian the details. She replied with a single word, "Good," which from her, he had learned, was the equivalent of anyone else sending 3 enthusiastic sentences. Dinner at Calla was easier. Not because nothing was imperfect. The table they were first shown to had a support beam that cut the clearance tighter than ideal, and the waiter initially directed his questions about the menu at Logan rather than Vivian before correcting himself after her first direct answer made it obvious who was actually in the conversation. But because Logan had stopped running 3 steps ahead, and Vivian had stopped waiting to see if she needed to tell him to stop, they'd found something closer to a rhythm. It was still new enough to feel slightly precarious, the way a rhythm always did before it became automatic, but it was theirs. "Hargrove's pushing for a formal review of the accessibility division," she said, somewhere between the hummus and the main course. She said it the way she said most things that were bothering her. Matter-of-factly, like she was reporting the weather, the flatness of tone a tell rather than a cover. "What kind of review?" "Performance. ROI. Whether the division is generating sufficient return relative to the resources it requires." She broke off a piece of bread without eating it. "Which it is. I have the numbers. The numbers are not the problem." "What's the problem?" "The problem is that a formal review creates a paper trail that makes the division look provisional. It signals to clients, to partners, to people we're trying to recruit that this part of the company is under scrutiny, which changes how they engage with us before the review is even finished." "Can he call for that unilaterally?" "He needs 3 board members. He has 3 board members." She put the bread down. "I found out this morning." Logan watched her. She was holding the information with a stillness that he recognized now. Not calm, but the appearance of calm, the kind that took work. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to request an urgent meeting with Miriam Chen tonight, and I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks building a case so thorough that the review becomes an argument for expansion rather than a question of survival." She looked at him. "And I'm going to eat this dinner first, because I've had 4 hours of phone calls, and I need 45 minutes where nobody is asking me to justify myself." "Then we won't talk about it anymore tonight." "Thank you." He refilled her water glass. She didn't comment on it, just drank, and he thought about how that was also something he'd learned. The difference between doing something and making a moment out of it. They talked about other things. He told her about a class discussion that had gotten unexpectedly heated, a unit on labor history, a student who'd argued that workers should just find better jobs. Another who'd pointed out with devastating precision that her family had been in the same Pennsylvania town for 4 generations because that was where the work was, and the first student going quiet in a way Logan recognized as the particular quiet of someone genuinely reconsidering something. "Did they come back?" Vivian asked. "She stayed after class. Asked if I had recommendations for reading." He turned his glass. "That's the moment, not the argument, the aftermath." "The quarter horse moment," Vivian said. He looked at her. "The what?" "Quarter horse. No ego, all competence. Does what it's supposed to do and doesn't need credit." She met his eyes. "You're describing a moment where you did your job and the result happened later, without you in the room." He considered that. "I guess I am. That's a hard thing to be satisfied by." "Sometimes. But the alternative is teaching for the performance of teaching, which kids can smell from 40 feet away." "Adults too," she said. "I've sat through a lot of presentations by consultants who were more interested in sounding insightful than in actually changing anything." "Is that why you went into implementation instead of advisory?" She looked at him with slight surprise, the way she did when a question hit closer than she'd expected. "You've been paying attention. You mentioned it in passing about a month ago. Most people don't file things away. I'm a history teacher. Filing things away is the entire job." She was quiet for a moment, turning her wine glass. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly why. Advisory is safe. You recommend, you report, you move on. If nothing changes, that's an implementation failure, not an advisory failure." She shook her head slightly. "I wanted the part where things actually changed or didn't, where I had to be in the room for the result." "Even when the result is Hargrove calling a review?" "Especially then." Her jaw set slightly. "If I'm going to fail, I want it to be from actually doing the thing, not from hedging." He looked at her across the table. In the warm lighting of Calla, with the last of her wine and the remains of a shared plate of roasted vegetables between them, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. The Hargrove thing was sitting on her, heavier than she was performing it. "Come here Saturday," he said. She looked up. "What?" "To the apartment. Lily's been asking, not pressuring, just mentioning, and I think you could use a Saturday that has nothing to do with board meetings." He held her gaze. "You said you wanted to meet her eventually. I'm saying eventually might be Saturday." Vivian was quiet for longer than usual. "That's a step," she said. "I know. Once I'm part of her life in a real way." "I know," he said again. "I thought about that. I thought about it a lot before I said it." He kept his voice steady. "I'm not asking because it's convenient or because I want to test something. I'm asking because you've been a real thing in my life for 2 months, and she's the most real thing in my life, and it feels more dishonest to keep them separate than to bring them together carefully." She looked at the table, then at him. "What does she know to expect?" "That someone I care about is coming over. That her name is Vivian. That she'll be in a wheelchair, which Lily has already processed, as you know, through the medium of engineering diagrams." He paused. "And that she has correct opinions about horses." Something in Vivian's face shifted. The careful professional distance she maintained like a second skin developed a small, visible crack just around the edges. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday." "I'm not performing anything," she said. "If she asks difficult questions, she will absolutely ask difficult questions. I'm not going to pretend to be something that—" "Vivian," he said her name quietly. "She's 7 and she already likes you because of the horse thing. Just be the person you actually are and she'll figure out the rest." She looked at him for a moment. "You make that sound simple." "I don't think it's simple. I think you're walking into something that matters, and that's scary." He didn't look away. "But I'll be there." She nodded once. It was small and deliberate and carried more weight than the movement warranted. Saturday arrived overcast and smelling like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. Logan had cleaned the apartment with the particular thoroughness of a man trying not to overthink cleaning an apartment, which meant it was clean but not suspiciously so, and Lily had contributed by organizing her horse drawings into what she called a presentation, but which was actually just a stack she planned to show Vivian in sequence once she determined the timing was right. Logan found out about the presentation 30 minutes before Vivian was due to arrive. "You made a presentation," he said. "It's not a presentation," Lily said. "It's just drawings. In order." "Why are they in order?" "Because they tell a story." She looked at him with the expression she'd inherited directly from Claire, the one that said the answer was obvious and she was being patient about explaining it. "You can't show someone drawings out of order. That doesn't make any sense." "Okay," Logan said. "Just let her get settled before the presentation." "I know, Dad. And don't ask her more than 3 questions before—" "Dad?" Lily looked at him. "I know how to talk to people." He thought about this and decided she probably had a point. She routinely talked to the parents at school pickup with more social ease than he did. Vivian arrived at 11, and Lily opened the door before Logan got there because she'd been watching from the window. There was a moment, the particular held breath quality of 2 people meeting each other for the first time when they already know they matter, and Logan watched it from 6 feet away and tried not to hold his breath. Lily looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Lily. "You're Vivian," Lily said. "I am," Vivian said. "You must be Lily." "Yeah." A pause, during which Lily appeared to be conducting some kind of internal assessment. "Your wheels are really quiet. Our neighbor has a cart and it's super squeaky." Vivian's expression did the thing Logan loved, the almost smile that arrived ahead of the decision to smile. "I had them serviced recently." "That's smart." Lily stepped back. "You can come in. I have drawings." "So I've heard." Lily looked at Logan. "You told her?" "I mentioned it." "You weren't supposed to mention it yet." She turned back to Vivian with the efficient course correction of someone who'd grown up with an imperfect parent and had developed adaptive strategies. "Ignore him. Come in." Vivian came in. The drawings were, as described, in order. Vivian sat at the kitchen table and Lily stood beside her and went through them with the methodical focus of someone who had prepared for this and intended to deliver. There were 14 drawings. Logan made coffee and stayed near the counter and listened to his daughter explain the structural differences between different horse breeds with an accuracy he couldn't fully verify and a confidence that required no verification. "This one's a quarter horse," Lily said, placing drawing number 7 on the table. "They're the best for working because they're strong and they don't show off." "That's exactly right," Vivian said. Lily looked at her with slightly narrowed eyes, the look she got when she was checking for condescension. Apparently she found none because she moved on. "Dad said you know about horses." "Some. I haven't ridden in a long time." "Did you ride before your accident?" Logan set his coffee cup down carefully.
"Lily," he started. "It's a real question," Lily said without looking at him. She looked at Vivian. "I'm not trying to be rude, I just wanted to know." Vivian looked at Lily steadily. "Yes," she said, "I used to ride trail riding mostly, nothing competitive." "Do you miss it?" "Some days." A pause. "I miss the smell of it more than the riding, honestly. Hay and leather and that specific outside smell that horses have." Lily thought about this seriously. "I drew a picture of a way someone in a wheelchair could ride." She found drawing number 11. Logan recognized it, the one from the night Lily had worked out the engineering for 15 minutes. "I think if the saddle had a flat part on the sides and straps here and here, you could transfer from the chair and it would work." Vivian looked at the drawing. She was quiet for a moment. A different kind of quiet than usual, with something underneath it that Logan recognized as effort. "You thought about the transfer," Vivian said. "You have to think about the transfer," Lily said, as if this were obvious. "That's the hard part, right? Getting from one place to another. Once you're in the saddle, it would be fine because you'd have your hands." Yes," Vivian said. "That's exactly right. I can give you the drawing if you want, so someone could make it." Vivian looked at the drawing of the horse with its crayon-engineered saddle apparatus and the figure seated in it with clear satisfaction, and Logan watched Vivian's jaw move slightly, the way it did when she was deciding how much to let show. "I'd like that," she said. "Very much." Lily handed it over with the directness of someone completing a transaction she'd been planning, then immediately moved to drawing 12 and continued the presentation. Logan turned back to his coffee and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. His 7-year-old had looked at a problem, drawn a solution, and handed it to the person who needed it without ceremony. He thought about what Vivian had said once, about the people who showed up in the gray year not to fix things but just to be there. Lily didn't know about the gray year. She'd just looked at a person and seen what the person needed, which was someone to not make a thing of the thing and also to maybe solve the horse problem. He was incredibly proud of her, and also, quietly, wrecked in the particular way that beautiful small moments could wreck a person. They spent the afternoon in the apartment, the 3 of them in the loose orbit of a Saturday without agenda. Lily at some point moved from the table to the floor with a book, the specific variety of present but independent that kids did when they decided the adults were acceptable company and didn't require active management. Vivian and Logan talked on the couch about the Hargrove situation, which she'd updated him on. Miriam Chen had been sharper than expected and had come with her own numbers, and the review was looking less like a threat and more like something Vivian could turn into a platform if she played it correctly. And about other things, lighter things, the kind of conversation that moved in no particular direction because it didn't need to. At one point, Lily looked up from her book and said, to no one in particular, "Vivian, do you want to stay for lunch? Dad makes good grilled cheese, but he burns it if you don't watch him." Logan opened his mouth. "That's an accurate assessment," Vivian said. "How would you know?" Logan said. "You told me you let Lily's toast burn twice last week because you were answering emails." "That was toast. Grilled cheese is different." "Is it?" Lily looked between them with the expression of someone watching a tennis match and already knowing who was going to win. "I'll watch the grilled cheese," Vivian said. "I don't need supervision." "Someone clearly does," Lily said, and went back to her book. Ticked. He burned one corner of one sandwich, which he felt was statistically reasonable given the sample size. Vivian said nothing about it, just ate the unburned part with the unimpressed equanimity of someone who had predicted this outcome and didn't need to make a point of it.
Lily ate her entire sandwich in what seemed like 4 bites and asked if there was more. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, and it was loud in the way a table with a 7-year-old was always loud. Lily was explaining something about a book she was reading, a story about a girl who discovered an underground river and spent 3 chapters trying to map it before realizing the map was the wrong approach. And Vivian listened with the specific quality of attention that Logan had noticed she brought to everything that interested her, the kind that made people feel like what they were saying actually mattered. Why was the map the wrong approach? Vivian asked. Because the river moved, Lily said, with the satisfaction of someone delivering a solved puzzle. The water didn't go the same way every time, so she had to learn the rules of how it moved instead of drawing where it was. Vivian looked at her. That's a very good distinction. Lily shrugged, but she was pleased. Logan could always tell when she was pleased because she became slightly less still, the way a cat did when something good was happening that it wasn't going to openly acknowledge. After lunch, Lily took her book to her room for what she called reading time, and Logan recognized as the generous social exit of a child giving the adult space, which was something she'd started doing this year and which still occasionally floored him. He washed the plates. Vivian stayed at the kitchen table. She's extraordinary, Vivian said. I know. He set a plate in the rack. I can't take credit for most of it. She came that way. You kept her that way. That's the part that is yours. He turned around, leaning against the counter. Is it hard? Being here? She understood what he meant. He could tell from the slight pause. No, she said. It's a lot. But not hard in the way you mean. She looked at her hands. I was afraid it would feel like something I couldn't fit into. A ready-made family with a shape I didn't match. Does it? No. She looked up. That's what's surprising. It doesn't feel like fitting into something. It just feels like Saturday. A small, genuine shrug. Like being somewhere that's okay to be. He looked at her for a moment. She was sitting at his kitchen table with afternoon light coming through the window behind her, and she had a crayon drawing of a horse in her bag that his daughter had given her, and she looked not happy exactly, not in the simple, clean way that words sometimes implied. She looked like a person in the middle of something real, which was different and better. I need to tell you something, he said. Okay. He stayed where he was, against the counter. I'm in love with you. I don't need you to say anything back. This isn't a moment where I need the moment to be a moment. I just wanted you to know because it's true. And I've been walking around with it for a while, and it feels dishonest not to say it. Vivian looked at him. The apartment was quiet. From Lily's room, faintly, the sound of a page turning. How long? She said. Probably around the second date, when you told me about the cooking competition shows and the bread crying. He kept his voice level. Something about that just landed. She let out a breath. It wasn't quite a laugh, and it wasn't quite something else. That's a very strange detail to fall in love over. I know. I'm a history teacher. We find the specific detail more convincing than the general thing. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were still on the table. I'm not going to say it back right now. I know. Not because it isn't... She stopped. I'm careful about those words. I've been careful about a lot of words since the accident because I learned that I could survive losing things I thought I couldn't survive losing, and that knowledge doesn't make you braver, necessarily. It makes you more deliberate. That makes sense. But I want you to know that what you just said didn't scare me. She met his eyes. That's not nothing. That might be the most specific thing I can tell you right now. He nodded. It's enough, he said. She held his gaze. Logan. Yeah. Thank you, she said. For Saturday. She gestured slightly, taking in the kitchen and the drawings and the lunch and the afternoon. All of this. You don't have to thank me. I know, she said. I wanted to anyway. From Lily's room, a small voice. Dad, can Vivian come back next Saturday? Logan looked at the ceiling briefly. Vivian looked at the hallway toward Lily's room. She was listening, Logan said. I have excellent hearing, Lily called. Vivian pressed her lips together to stop the smile from arriving too fast, and failed. Yes, she called back, loud enough to be heard through the door. If it's okay with your dad. It's his apartment, Lily said, but I vote yes. Logan looked at Vivian. She looked at him. Democratic process, he said. Seems like the motion carries, she said, and they stayed at the kitchen table in the afternoon light, with the sound of a page turning and the rain that had finally decided to fall tapping against the window. And it was not perfect, because nothing was. But it was steady and warm and full of the specific weight of things that mattered, and that was more than enough. The board review took 3 weeks. Vivienne had told Logan it would take 2, which meant she'd already built in a buffer and still came in a week over, which told him more about how hard the 3 weeks actually were than anything she said directly. She didn't complain, not in any sustained way. She reported, updated, occasionally arrived at his apartment on a Wednesday night with the particular quiet of someone who had used up most of their words for the day and needed to sit somewhere that didn't require her to perform competence for a few hours. Those evenings became their own kind of thing. Lily would be in bed or heading there, and Vivienne would come in and Logan would have made something simple. Soup, pasta, once a grilled cheese that he did not burn, which Vivienne acknowledged with a single raised eyebrow that constituted high praise. And they would sit at the kitchen table or on the couch and talk about small things or nothing much, and somewhere in that space Vivienne would decompress in the way she only decompressed when she wasn't being watched by anyone who needed something from her. He understood, over those 3 weeks, that this was not a thing she'd had much of in her life. People who needed things from her were plentiful. People who just sat with her were rarer than they should have been. The review itself, when it concluded, did exactly what Vivienne had told him she would make it do. It became a platform. She presented to the full board with numbers that Miriam Chen had helped sharpen and a case for expansion that reframed the accessibility division not as a charitable enterprise, but as a competitive differentiator in a market where corporate clients were increasingly mandated to demonstrate inclusive infrastructure. Hargrove had pushed back twice, both times with the same argument about core business priority. Both times met with Vivienne's specific brand of patience that was not patience at all, but rather the appearance of it worn over something considerably harder. The vote was 5-3. Expansion approved. She texted Logan from the parking garage afterward. Not a long text, just 5-3. Hargrove's face when Miriam voted yes. He replied, "I want details." She replied, "Later. I need to sit in my car for 10 minutes first." He understood that too. Sometimes winning was almost as depleting as the fight. He got the full details on Friday night over the Thai food they'd been returning to once a month since the night it had salvaged a difficult Saturday, and the telling was better for the delay. She'd had a few days to find the parts that were almost funny. The moment when Hargrove had tried to table the vote and the board chair had looked at him with the particular expression of someone who had sat in rooms with Gerald Hargrove for 15 years and was out of patience, the moment when the vote was called, and Miriam had said yes with a completeness that left no interpretive room. "She called me afterward," Vivienne said. "Miriam," she said, "you've been building that case for 2 years. I wanted to wait until you had enough rope to hang him with." She shook her head. She watched me work for 2 years before she said that. "Did that bother you?" "It would have, a year ago." She moved her chopsticks. Now I think she was right. If she'd intervened earlier, Hargrove would have just recalibrated and come at it from a different angle. The way it happened, he burned his credibility in front of the whole board trying to bury something that had already proven itself. She paused. "I hate that she was right. Because it required you to take more damage than necessary in the meantime." "Yes, flat and honest. I took hits I shouldn't have had to take, but the outcome is cleaner." She looked at her plate. "I'm still deciding whether I think that trade was worth it." Can both things be true? That it was worth it, and also that it shouldn't have been necessary? She looked at him. "When did you get annoying?" "I'm a history teacher. I specialize in things that were both inevitable and preventable." "That's deeply irritating as a framework." "I know. My students hate it too until they don't." She made a sound that was mostly exasperation and partly affection, a combination he had come to recognize as one of her tells. She didn't volunteer affection in any obvious way. It came through in the exasperation, the way annoyance was the vehicle for something warmer underneath. He loved her for it, among a long list of other reasons he'd stopped cataloging because the list had gotten too long to be useful. What nobody had told him, before this, before Vivienne, before the specific experience of loving someone whose life came with a different set of logistical facts than his, was how much of it would simply become ordinary, not invisible, not erased, but ordinary, in the way that all the specific textures of a person became ordinary once they were part of your daily life. The way he knew which restaurants to call first and which questions to ask. The way he'd learned to read the slight tension in her shoulders that meant her chair needed an adjustment and she was going to handle it herself and didn't need him to do anything except not hover. The way Lily had developed her own fluency, entirely separate from his. She'd asked Vivian 3 weeks after the first Saturday what transferring felt like, and Vivian had explained it, and Lily had nodded with the focused interest she brought to all mechanical questions, and had then asked whether the wheelchair's charge lasted all day, and Vivian had said mostly yes. And Lily had said, like my tablet, with complete satisfaction, as if this cross-reference had explained everything. After that, Lily treated the wheelchair with the same matter-of-fact relationship she had with other technology in her life, occasionally curious about specific aspects, generally unbothered. When they went places together, she'd sometimes position herself to Vivian's right without appearing to think about it, which was the side with more clearance in most spaces. Logan had noticed this for 3 weeks before he'd understood she was doing it deliberately. He'd asked her about it once. It's just easier, Lily said, with the shrug of someone describing common sense. Did you figure that out yourself? She looked at him with Claire's expression again, the patient one. I pay attention, Dad. He hadn't pushed it. There was nothing to push. 7 months after the dinner at Ember and Oak, Vivian's foundation completed the Sallow Park community space, a project she'd been midwifing for almost 2 years, a complete redesign of an underused city park that had been, in its previous form, mostly inaccessible to anyone with a mobility device or visual impairment, and somewhat hostile to kids. The new design had taken everything that was wrong with the old one and rethought it from the ground up. Surfaces that worked for wheels and feet equally, equipment designed for children of different abilities to use together, rather than in adjacent but separate areas, pathways that were logical rather than decorative, lighting that was actually sufficient after dark. Vivian had fought with the city's parks department for 4 months over the lighting. Logan knew this because he had listened to her reconstruct those 4 months across approximately 6 separate dinners, each reconstruction adding new detail and a slightly higher level of barely controlled frustration at the specific bureaucrat who had kept conflating ambient with adequate. She'd won. The lighting was adequate. The opening was on a Saturday in May, which came in cool and bright the way the best May days did, the kind of day that made the whole country look like it had been art-directed. Logan drove. Lily had been talking about the park opening for 2 weeks with the proprietary enthusiasm of someone whose mother figure had built a thing and she wanted everyone to know it. She had in fact told her entire class. You told your class? Logan had said when he found out. I told them we were going to the opening of a park. Lily had paused, done a quick internal accounting of words, and finished. Of Vivian's park. What did you call her? Lily had looked at him with the expression of someone who had been hoping to avoid exactly this conversation. I said Vivian, that's her name. To your class. And to Miss Patterson. She asked who built it, and I said Vivian Cross's foundation, and Ms. Patterson looked her up and showed the class her website, and everyone thought it was really cool. Logan had spent a moment with this. His daughter had turned Vivian's project into a current events presentation for her 2nd grade class. Vivienne, when he told her, had gone very still for a moment and then said, she showed the class my website, in a tone that was attempting composure with limited success. The photo on the website, Vivienne had added. You look good in it. I look like I'm about to fire someone. You look competent. She probably thought that was the right picture to show. Vivienne had been quiet for a moment. She's going to make me cry one of these days, and I am not prepared for that. She already almost made you cry with the horse drawing. The horse drawing was different. How? I was ready for feelings that day. I am not structurally prepared for an 8, no, still 7, for a 7-year-old to be my PR person without warning. He'd laughed. She'd tried not to and failed. Yet, the park was everything she'd described and better in person. Logan had heard the details so many times that he thought he'd built a reasonably accurate mental model of it. And he had, but the mental model didn't account for what it felt like to walk into a space that had been designed with genuine intention, where you could feel the difference between a place built to minimum standards and a place built by someone who had imagined, specifically and concretely, who would be there and what they would need. Kids were already everywhere. The opening had technically been going for 40 minutes by the time they arrived, and the play structures were already claimed with the decisive speed of children who assessed new territory and moved in. What struck Logan, what stopped him for a moment on the main pathway and made him stand still, was that the kids were mixed, not in the organized way of a program, not in the self-conscious way of adults making a point. Just kids using a playground, some with mobility devices, some without, on equipment that had been designed so that distinction wasn't the organizing principle of who could do what. A girl in a power wheelchair was in the middle of something that appeared to be a very competitive game with two kids on foot. None of the three were making any particular accommodation for each other. They were just playing. Lily saw this and moved toward it with the directness of a 7-year-old identifying an interesting social situation. "Lily," Logan said. "I'm just going to watch," she said, which meant she was going to be in the middle of it within 4 minutes. He let her go. He found Vivian near the east section of the park, in a cluster of people that included 2 city council members, the project architect and Carla, her assistant, the one who'd come to the hospital every day for 6 weeks with coffee and a specific moisturizer. Carla, he'd learned, was the most competent person in any room she entered, including rooms full of people who thought they were the most competent person. She caught Logan's eye across the group and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement that was also somehow an assessment and a passing grade, which he gathered from Carla was equivalent to a standing ovation. He waited at the edge of the group until the council members moved on, which took longer than it should have because one of them wanted to tell Vivian 3 times how impressed he was with the project. And Vivian received this with the gracious professional patience of someone who had learned to accept credit, while privately calculating whether the council member had actually voted for the initial funding authorization or had been in opposition until the press coverage made enthusiasm safer. Logan knew this was what she was thinking because she'd told him once that this was always what she was thinking when elected officials told her they were impressed. When the group thinned out, she turned and found him. "You're late," she said. "I'm 8 minutes late, and I had a 7-year-old. Those are related facts, not separate excuses." "Fair." He looked around at the park. "Vivian, this is... Don't make it a thing." "I'm not making it a thing. I'm trying to say it's... Logan..." Her voice was quiet, with something under it that he recognized as the pre-emotion warning she gave when she was close to a feeling she wasn't ready to have publicly. "If you say something that makes me cry in front of the city council, I will never forgive you." "I was just going to say the lighting is adequate." She pressed her lips together. The almost smile arrived faster than usual. "The lighting is more than adequate. I fought for 3 additional fixtures on the east path and I got them. It shows. It does show." She looked around the park, the particular look of someone who had held a vision in their head through 2 years of meetings and objections and contractor negotiations and was now standing inside the finished thing. "It really does." They stayed there for a moment. Around them the park moved, kids and parents and caregivers, and a dog someone had brought because the park was dog-friendly, which had been Vivian's specific addition after the Parks Department had initially left it out. "Where's Lily?" Vivian asked. "Somewhere in that game." He pointed. Lily was, as predicted, in the middle of it now, apparently explaining a rule to the boy on foot, while the girl in the power wheelchair made a quick strategic move behind him. Vivian watched. She's explaining the rules to the wrong person. She knows. She's strategic. Vivian looked at him. "She's 7. Look, she's been 7 for 3 months and she's already better at people than I was at 30. You weren't bad at 30. I was awkward and I didn't know what I was doing." "You're still both of those things," she said. "I mean that kindly." He looked at her. "I know you do." The afternoon moved around them. The park filled and the light shifted the way it did in May when the angle was still early season, and Lily cycled back twice to report on the game and drink half a water bottle and report back out again. And Vivian spent time with the project team and with 2 families who found her specifically to tell her what the space meant to them, a conversation Logan stayed clear of because he understood those moments belonged to her in a way that didn't need an audience. He watched from across the path while a woman in a manual wheelchair talked to Vivian, and he watched Vivian listen with the full presence attention she gave things that mattered, and he watched the woman's face while she talked, the particular expression of someone saying a thing they'd been waiting to say to the specific person who would understand it. He didn't need to hear it. He understood what it was. Lily fell asleep in the car on the way home, the way she occasionally still did after a full day, head against the window, still in her jacket. Vivian rode with them. Her car was at their building,
and the drive was quiet, just the sound of the road and Lily's even breathing from the back seat. "Two families came to find me today," Vivian said, after a while. Her voice was low, not to wake Lily. "One of them has a son who's 8, cerebral palsy. He walked into that park and went directly to the climbing structure and climbed it. His mother said it was the first standard playground structure he'd ever been able to use." Logan kept his eyes on the road. "She was trying not to cry," Vivian said. "I was trying not to cry. We were both very bad at it." "That's what it's for," he said. "I know." A pause. "I know. I've known it conceptually for 2 years while we were building it, but standing there and watching it actually be the thing it was supposed to be." She stopped. "I kept thinking about the version of me that couldn't get into a restaurant without the loading dock and the smell of turpentine. Thinking about what it would have meant to have one space, one public space, that was just built for people like me from the start, not retrofitted, not accommodated, built. You built it. My team built it. I funded it and fought for it and drove everyone insane about the lighting. That's also building it." She turned to look out her window. "My father would have called it a distraction," she said. "He would have told me to focus on the consulting business and donate a check if I wanted to help with accessibility. He was a very practical man." "Do you think he'd have been wrong?" A long pause. "I think he would have been wrong, and I think he would have figured that out eventually. And I think that figuring it out would have been something we had together if he were still here." She said it quietly, without fresh grief, just the particular weight of things that were finished and couldn't be reopened. "He was wrong about some things, and right about more things than I admitted when I was 23 and thought I knew everything." "What was he right about?" "That this work is harder than it looks from the outside, that the resistance you face is structural and not personal, and you have to learn to engage with it structurally or it will exhaust you, treating every obstacle like an insult." She turned back to look at the road. "He was right about that, and I didn't listen for years, and it cost me a lot of energy I didn't have to spend." "You learned it eventually." "I learned it during the gray year," she said, "which I don't recommend as a learning environment, but which is efficient." Logan said nothing for a moment. From the back seat, Lily shifted in her sleep, made a small sound, went still again. "I want to ask you something," Logan said. "Okay." He kept his voice even. He'd been thinking about how to do this for 6 weeks, which meant he'd thought about it too much. And somewhere in the last week, he'd decided that thinking about it anymore was its own kind of avoidance, and that the right moment was probably not a grand stage-managed thing, but something that was actually true to who they were, which was 2 people in a car with a sleeping kid in the back seat, which was honestly the most accurate portrait of his actual life that he could offer anyone. "I want to marry you," he said. "That's not the question. That's the thing I know. The question is whether you're somewhere near wanting that too, and I'm not asking for the answer tonight. I know you need time with things. I know you don't rush decisions. I know this is not a small thing, and I'm not treating it like one. I just wanted to say the thing, so you knew where I was." The car was quiet. He could feel her looking at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "You've been sitting on that for a while," she said. "About 6 weeks. You should have said something sooner." "I was trying to find the right time." "Logan?" Her voice was low and direct and had the quality it had when she was about to say something that had already been decided. "There isn't a right time for things like this. There's just the time when you say it." I know that. I said it." "You did." A pause. He couldn't read her tone well enough from those 2 words, which was unusual. He'd gotten reasonably good at reading her over 7 months, but she'd gone somewhere he couldn't quite follow. "Vivian, I want to marry you," she said. He let that sit for exactly 1 second and then said, "That was faster than I expected. I told you I don't rush decisions." He could hear the careful control in her voice, the holding of something that wanted to be larger. "I made this one 3 months ago. I was waiting to see how long it would take you." He exhaled. It came out a little unsteady. 3 months. I'm a planner. You're... He stopped. "Vivian." Eyes on the road. "I am looking at the road. I can tell from your voice that you want to not look at the road." "I really want to not look at the road." "Later," she said, "when we're parked."
From the back seat, without opening her eyes or changing her position against the window, Lily said, "Are you guys getting married?" Logan and Vivian both went silent. "Lily," Logan said. "I was almost asleep," she said. "Almost isn't all the way." "How long have you been listening?" "Since the 6 weeks part." A pause. "So are you?" Logan looked at the road. He could feel Vivian very carefully not laughing beside him. "That's a conversation for when you're more awake," he said. "I'm awake enough," Lily said. "I just want to know if I should be excited." Logan glanced at Vivian. She looked back at him and her face was doing all of it at once. The almost smile, the wet edge at the corners of her eyes she was absolutely not acknowledging. The particular look she got when something had landed past the defenses she'd spent years building. "Yeah," Logan said. "You can be excited." From the back seat a pause, then a small and deeply satisfied sound, and then the specific silence of a 7-year-old who had gotten the information she needed and was now actually going back to sleep. They carried Lily up to the apartment. She'd crossed from almost asleep back to fully under in the elevator, boneless in Logan's arms the way sleeping kids were, and he tucked her in with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd done it thousands of times, pulled the blanket up, and came back out to the living room where Vivian was waiting. He sat on the couch beside her. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. "We're getting married." Apparently. The almost smile made it all the way. "You proposed from the driver's seat of a Honda." "It's a good car. It's a 7-year-old car with a juice box wrapper under the passenger seat. That's Lily's." "I know." She reached over and took his hand, which she did rarely and intentionally. Vivian Cross did not do casual physical contact. Every gesture was chosen, which meant every gesture meant something. "Logan." "Yeah." "I want you to know something." He waited. "When I walked into Ember and Oak 7 months ago," she said, "I had already written off the evening. I'd been burned enough times that I had a number on it. I was going to give it 1 hour, be polite, and leave. I had the exit prepared." She looked at their hands. "And then you moved a chair. You moved a chair, and you didn't need anything for it. No acknowledgement, no credit, no moment. You just moved it and asked me what I wanted to drink. It was in the way." "Everything in my life has been in the way," she said quietly. "For 4 years, everything has been an obstacle to navigate, or a barrier to argue with, or an accommodation that made me feel like an afterthought. And you moved one chair and moved on, and something in me went, oh, there's this person who doesn't need the situation to be about himself." He looked at her. "That's a low bar." "That's a catastrophically low bar," she agreed. "And you cleared it so easily that you didn't even know it was there." She squeezed his hand once, the kind of once that was a full sentence. "I'm not easy to be with. I know that. I have a board that gives me headaches and an accessibility crusade that takes up most of my emotional bandwidth and a family that is complicated and a history that made me careful in ways that probably made this harder than it needed to be." "You made it as hard as it needed to be," he said. "Not harder." She looked at him. "You never made me feel like I was too much." "You're not too much." "Some people would disagree." "Some people," he said, "are wrong about you, in ways that are their loss and, as it turns out, my good fortune." She made the sound that was half exasperation, half something warmer, and he thought he would never stop being glad that he'd learned the difference. "You're going to be insufferably good at wedding vows," she said. "I'm a history teacher. I've been storing up observations for years. Don't you dare make me cry at our own wedding." "I can't promise that." "Try." "I will try," he said, "and I'll probably fail, and you'll forgive me." She looked at him for a long moment. The apartment was quiet around them. Lily asleep down the hall, the May night outside the window doing the soft, dark thing that good May nights did. "Yes," she said, "I will." They married the following March, at a venue that Vivian had vetted personally, and which her team had confirmed 3 times across every dimension of accessibility, because Vivian Cross was not going to have a single guest at her own wedding experience a loading dock. The ceremony was small, 40 people, the ones that mattered, in a room with warm light and wide aisles and flowers that Logan had been told the name of and immediately forgotten, and which were apparently correct. Lily was the flower girl. She had opinions about this role,
Primarily that the traditional scattering of petals was inefficient, and she would prefer to carry them in a neat arrangement, which the florist accommodated after Vivian explained the situation with the particular brevity of someone who had learned to give Lily's logic its due. Lily walked down the aisle with her flowers arranged to her satisfaction and found her seat with the composure of someone who had been preparing for this moment since October and was not going to waste it. Logan cried during the vows. He'd known he would. He did not apologize for it. Vivian did not cry during the vows because she was Vivian, but her hands were not entirely steady when she took the ring, and she let him see that without hiding it, which he understood was its own kind of thing. Her version of the same feeling, expressed the only way she knew to express it. Dana cried enough for several people. Carla, standing with the small group on Vivian's side, remained composed and spent the ceremony looking at Vivian with the specific expression of someone who had sat in a hospital for 6 weeks and was now watching the destination of that particular road and considered the distance worth it. Miriam Chen attended and brought a gift that was a substantial donation to the foundation and a handwritten note that Vivian read in the car afterward and did not share with Logan, which he understood meant it had said the true thing and she needed to hold it privately for a while. Hargrove did not attend. He hadn't been invited. Yeah. What Logan understood afterward, not immediately, but in the accumulation of the months that followed, the ordinary Saturdays and the hard weeks and the dinners and the arguments they had occasionally and recovered from, and the mornings when Vivian left early for something important and he made Lily's lunch and got her to school and came home to a house that was different from the house he'd been in before, fuller and more complicated, and occasionally more difficult and consistently more alive. What he understood was that love was mostly not the dramatic moments. It was not the first dinner or the proposal from the driver's seat or the wedding in March. Those were real, and they mattered. But they were the marked points on a map, and the map was mostly the space between them, the learning each other's specific language, the getting things wrong and saying so, the understanding that another person's limits were not obstacles to route around, but simply the honest shape of who they were. He understood what Vivian had been building all along, not just the park, not just the company, but the insistence repeated across every inaccessible doorway and every patronizing board member and every person who had looked at her and seen only what she couldn't do, that she was going to take up her full amount of space in the world and she was not going to make it smaller to make anyone else comfortable. He thought about his students and the question he always came back to: what could have been done differently? He thought about all the moments in a life where one different choice opens a different road. He thought about his sister calling him on a Tuesday night and saying she had a friend, and him saying no, and her saying please, just once, and him saying fine, and buying a new shirt, and standing on the sidewalk outside a restaurant for 4 minutes trying to work up the nerve to walk in. He thought about a chair that was in the way. He thought about the one small thing he'd done without thinking, without calculation, without needing it to be anything other than what it was. Just a chair, just moved, just done, and how it had been the first word in a sentence that became his whole life. He didn't think he was extraordinary for it. That was the thing he most wanted to be clear about in his own accounting. He hadn't done something remarkable. He'd done the basic human thing of seeing a person and responding to them as a person without requiring them to manage his comfort first. The bar was so low it was nearly underground and he'd stepped over it, and somehow that had been enough to change everything. That was the part that stayed with him, not as triumph, but as a question he kept returning to, in the classroom and outside of it. How much of what we call kindness is actually just the absence of willful blindness? How much damage gets done not by cruelty, but by people who simply couldn't be bothered to move a chair? He didn't have a clean answer. He was a history teacher. He'd learned to distrust clean answers. But he had Vivian, who was complex and precise and stubborn in ways that drove him insane and in ways that he admired past his ability to explain it. He had Lily, who had solved the horse problem in crayon at age 7 and had never stopped being ahead of him in ways he was genuinely grateful for. He had a life that was not the life he'd imagined when he was standing on that sidewalk in October, too nervous to walk through a restaurant door. It was better, harder, and more real, and built out of things that had broken and been repaired rather than things that had never broken, which in his experience was the only kind of structure you could actually trust. Vivian told him once, late at night when Lily was asleep, and the apartment was the particular quiet of a house that had people in it, that the gray year had taught her One thing she hadn't been able to learn any other way. That surviving something didn't mean you were done with it. It meant you carried it forward into the next thing, and the thing shaped you, and you shaped it back. And at some point, the thing you'd survived became just part of the material you were made of, neither the worst thing nor the defining thing, just one more true thing in a life that had a lot of true things in it. He'd thought about that for a long time. He thought it was right. He thought it was the most honest description of how people got through their lives that he'd ever heard. And he thought it applied to grief and to accident and to the specific work of letting someone in after you'd learned exactly how much it could cost to lose them. He thought about Claire the way he always thought about Claire, not with the breathless missing of the first years, but with the settled permanence of someone who was part of him and wasn't going anywhere, whose laugh lived in Lily, and whose particular stubbornness about dishwasher loading. Logan still thought about every single time, and probably always would, and had learned to receive as a kind of company rather than a kind of pain. He thought about all of it, and then Vivian shifted beside him and said, "You're thinking loudly." "Sorry. What about?" He looked at the ceiling. "All of it," he said. "The whole thing." She was quiet for a moment. "Good, all of it, or complicated all of it?" "Both," he said, "at the same time." She settled against him, which was not something she did casually, which meant it was a choice, which meant it was something. "That's about right," she said. He put his arm around her. Outside, the city did what cities did at night, going about its enormous indifferent business, full of other lives in various stages of their own complicated all of it. The apartment was warm. Down the hall, Lily was asleep, probably dreaming about horses. It was enough. More than enough. It was the exact right amount of everything, imperfect and true and entirely, completely theirs.